Hi everybody, I'm Emma Carroll and I'm going to be reading to you today a few little extracts from one of my Christmas stories, which is called The Snow Sister. Now, The Snow Sister is set in Victorian times and it's about a girl called Pearl who discovers some very exciting news. Now, this news arrives on Christmas Eve and it's news that could potentially change everything for her family. In fact, it could end up being the very, very best Christmas her family have ever had. But she doesn't quite know what the news is yet. And as she's frantically trying to make all these Christmas preparations so that the big day is very exciting, her father goes off on a journey in the snow to Bath to find out what this big news might be. Okay, so the story begins on Christmas Eve, as I've said, and the first chapter has that lovely title. It's called The Last Will and Testament of Silas Granger, and this is the start of the story where that incredible news arrives at her family's door. Okay, off we go. So chapter 1. Christmas Eve morning wasn't the best time for a telling off, yet Pearl Granger was about to get one. She'd been outside in the snow for all of 2 minutes when above her head a window opened and her mother's voice rang out. "What in heaven's name are you doing, you daft child?" Pearl flinched. "Isn't what it looks like, Ma." What it did look like was a girl in a patched up frock putting the finishing touches to a person made out of snow. And that person, with 2 pilfered pieces of coal for eyes and a turnip for a nose, was now wearing Pearl's sister Agnes's best shawl. "Bring that back inside this instant, do you hear?" Ma said, and Pearl knew it wasn't the coal or the turnip her mother meant, though both were in short supply. Ma shut the window again with a slam. Pearl sniffed back her tears. She wasn't going to cry, not when it was very nearly Christmas and the snow lay so thick and beautiful on the ground. Ever since she could remember, she'd loved snow. So too had Agnes, and together they'd rolled in it, fought in it, shut their eyes and tasted it. Even without Agnes, the snow still made everything seem better, like a clean sheet over an old mattress. And Pearl was proud of her finished snow sculpture. The size of a real-life girl, it had a sharp face, a certain tilt of the head. With Agnes's shawl now in place, and with a good deal of squinting, it might almost be her sister stood before her. Almost, but not quite. With a sigh, Pearl removed the shawl and holding it to her face, breathed in. Agnes's smell was of violets, the sweets, not the flowers, and after she died it had lingered in the house as if she couldn't quite leave. Only when Ma packed Agnes's things in a tin trunk did the violet smell disappear. A year later, and though it was bad luck to keep them, all their mourning clothes were folded and stored away inside the same trunk. Yet the blackness in their hearts proved more difficult to hide. That tin trunk, Pearl knew, was kept in the cellar between the coal heap and the vegetables. 3 winters it had been there. 3 winters of her sister's clothes hidden away, so that instead of hand-me-downs, Pearl made do with letting out skirt hems and patching up stockings worn thin at the toes. Not that she minded. Each winter when it snowed, she crept down into the dark for 2 bits of coal, a turnip, and something of Agnes's from the trunk to make a snow person, or more precisely, a snow sister. It didn't bring her sister back, and the snow person always melted in the end. Yet for a little while she had a snow sister, which meant she missed Agnes just a tiny bit less. Today though, Agnes's best shawl didn't smell of violets. Pearl breathed deeper, willing some scrap of her sister to still be there, but all she got was a noseful of dust that made her sneeze. "Bless you!" It was Mr. Leonard, the postman. "Oh, that hill on Heather Lane don't get any smaller," he puffed. "And now everyone's sending these new Christmas cards. I'm feeling like a pack mule." He stood red-faced on the path that led past 6 identical front doors, Pearl's being the first cottage in the row. The bag he wore strapped across his chest certainly looked fuller than usual, but Pearl's eyes went to the envelope in Mr. Leonard's hand. "Take it straight into your pa," the postman said, giving her the envelope. "'Tis an official letter. Postmark says it's from Bath. She frowned. Bath? Bath was a day's walk away and full of fine, tall houses. So Pa said she didn't know anyone who lived in Bath. And yet she felt a dancing in the pit of her stomach and wasn't sure why. With the letter in her hand, she hesitated. To Mr. Barnaby Granger, it said. The writing, squiggly and expensive looking, was on an envelope so thick it might have had a whole pamphlet inside. Go on, hurry, Mr. Leonard said. Waving her inside, he carried on to the next cottage in the row. Pearl took a deep breath. She felt that flutter in her stomach again. The letter was important. She was sure of it. What she didn't know was whether this was a good thing or a bad. Inside, she found her father lacing up his work boots. Already he had his coat and hat on because with the fire burning so feebly, it wasn't any warmer here than outside. He glared at the shawl in her hand. You been upsetting your mother again? She gave him the letter, tucking Agnes's shawl under her arm as she did so. This came. Postmark says it's Bath. He sat up straight. Oh, Pa said, taking the envelope from her and turning it over. Oh. Pearl swallowed nervously. At that moment, Ma came storming down the stairs. Pearl, you can't just take that shawl. Seeing Pa's face, she stopped. Whatever is it, Barnaby? We have a letter, he said, from Bath. Ma moved closer. Pearl wished he'd just hurry up and open it. Then everyone might forget about Agnes's shawl and she could sneak it back into the trunk without another word. But she knew Pa wouldn't be able to read the letter, not with his spectacles broken and no money for a new pair. Want me to read? She offered. Pa nodded and gave the envelope to her. Inside was just one sheet of very thick paper. The words on it were written in the same fancy, squiggly hand. Pearl cleared her throat. Dearest Sir, she read, you are requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Silas Granger. She glanced up. Silas Granger? Was he a relative then? From the look on her parents' faces, she knew he was, though she'd never heard the name before. So the letter was bad news. A will meant that someone had died. A Granger, she thought, and felt her tears well up again, even though this person wasn't close, like a sister. They hadn't died of fever, here, in this very house, whilst holding tight onto her hand. Yet Pa soon recovered himself. Well, well, all that money couldn't save the old devil in the end. Then he nodded. Read on, Pearl. She took a nervous breath. On Thursday, the 24th of December, at Whitstone and Whitstable Solicitors, Argyle Street, Bath. Proceedings will begin at 2 p.m. As the main beneficiary in the document, you are strongly advised to be prompt. Looking up, she saw her parents' faces had changed. Pa was almost smiling. Ma's hand covered her mouth as if she was fighting back a laugh. What's a beneficiary? Pearl asked. It means he's left us something in his will, said Pa. Ma shook her head. Only something? Barnaby, you're the main beneficiary. Looks like he's left you the lot. Taking the letter from Pearl and pocketing it, Pa got to his feet. Bath, today, 2 p.m. He glanced at the mantel clock. If I get a shift on, I might make it in time. But you'll lose a day's work, Pearl said, growing confused. Though Pa was a wheelwright by trade, the work had become unreliable. People travelled more and more by train these days. There was less call for carriage wheels, and even fine handcrafted ones like Pa made would never run as smooth as those on train tracks. So a day's work, when it came, was important. This is vital. He has to go, said Ma, and her parents shared a look that to Pearl seemed almost feverish. Who exactly is Silas Granger? She asked, even more confused. He is, your uncle, your father's only brother, said Ma, though they moved in very different worlds. Why haven't I heard of him before then? Father paused. We never got on, not even as boys. He always wanted bigger and better. Didn't care how he got it neither. 'Tis no surprise he got rich. We lost touch over the years. Ma interrupted. Now, Pearl, let your father get going, else we'll never make it to Bath. But why's he left us something if he didn't get on? Pearl said. She couldn't imagine not caring for your own flesh and blood. Not speaking for all those years, it felt such a terribly sad waste. Don't you fret, girl. Chances are we're about to become rich, said Ma. Pearl stared at her Ma, then her Pa. Rich? Us? This was getting madder by the minute. Perhaps our luck's changing, Pearly Pearl, Pa said, chucking her under the chin. Now stop your worrying. Yet still, Pearl didn't know what to make of it. From the doorstep, she waved Pa off until he was nothing but a trail of dark footprints in the snow. She hoped he was right, that life was about to get better. In the meantime, Ma, at least, was smiling again and seemed to have forgotten about telling her off. There we go. So that's the end of the very first chapter. Okay, so the next bit I'm going to read you comes from chapter 2. And this is where Pearl and her mum have decided they're going to make a Christmas pudding to celebrate this extraordinary Christmas they're about to have. Now, her mum sends Pearl off into town to buy the ingredients for the pudding, but the problem is they don't have any money to pay for those ingredients. So Pearl is going to have to beg very nicely the owner of the grocery store, Mr. Noble, to ask him if he can let her have the stuff, and she'll pay him tomorrow when their money comes through. So she goes into town. She's a little bit nervous. She's a little bit confused still by all that's happening, but she's also completely knocked sideways by how Christmassy and festive everything is, and starts to feel quite excited by that. Okay, so here we go. Town was but a short walk down the lane. The snow, top of the boot deep in places, made the going slow, and Pearl thought of poor Pa on his way to Bath. She dearly hoped a passing carter would take pity and offer him a ride, otherwise he might not make it back by tonight. By the time she reached town, she was sweating, made worse by Agnes's shawl, which Ma had insisted on tying around her before she left. "'Tis time you had it, really," Ma said. Its red and gold paisley suited Pearl's dark hair well, though without it her snow sister back home now looked rather plain and hardly like Agnes at all. The main street was heaving with shoppers and sellers and carts whizzing by. Pearl squeezed her way through the crowds. But on reaching the town square, she suddenly stopped. Her mouth fell open in awe. In the middle of the square was a fir tree decked with lights. It was easily as tall as a door and twice as wide. The lights she saw now were little fluttering candles. Snow, still falling softly, sat like fine sugar on the branches. Pearl felt certain she'd never seen such a magnificent sight. There you go, look, there's the picture of Pearl looking up at that Christmas tree that may well be the first Christmas tree she's properly ever seen. In fact, anyone walking past the tree, women, men, in top hats, children, seemed to slow down and smile. Pearl guessed this thing they were all staring at was a Christmas tree. In the newspaper there'd been pictures of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert next to one, except theirs had been indoors. She couldn't imagine such a tree inside her own tiny cottage. A person would have to live in a vast house with great high-ceilinged rooms. Then she remembered Pa's letter from Bath. If Pa comes home rich, maybe we'll live somewhere like that, she thought with a delicious shiver. And next Christmas, we'll have our tree indoors. It couldn't hurt to dream. Right now, though, she had pudding ingredients to get, and by the town clock it was already nearly 9:30. She set off again. The next part of the main street was lined with stalls selling spiced cider and hot pies, oranges and nuts, cut glass and flowers. As the crowd slowed her pace, Pearl couldn't help but look at the lovely things for sale. Ma would like one of those little blue enamel brooches. And what about a scarf for Pa? The green was such a fine colour. But even wearing Agnes's best shawl over her patched up clothes, the storeholders knew she couldn't afford anything. "Don't you touch that, miss," they'd say, watching her like a hawk. "It's too pricey for your sort." My sort, huh? Pearl thought crossly. Maybe not for much longer. It was on the tip of her tongue to say so too, but they'd only laugh, so in the end she gave up and walked on. A left turn off the main street brought her at last to Noble and Sons grocers. Either side of the door, 2 bay windows curved out over the pavement. Waiting opposite those windows was a carriage, its colour a distinctive ladybird red. Pearl knew it instantly. It belonged to the Lockwoods, the richest family for miles. They weren't old money, Pa always said, for Mr. Lockwood had made his fortune on the railways, but they certainly had plenty of it. Yet here they were shopping at Mr. Noble's, just like ordinary folk did. Perhaps they'd even have more in common soon, Pearl thought with a smile. As she opened the shop door, it flew inwards suddenly. Pearl went with it. Stumbling into the shop, she fell to her knees on the sawdust-covered floor. "Good gracious, what an entrance!" said a rich-sounding voice. Pearl froze. Someone had been on the other side of the door, and that someone now stood over her. She knew the voice all right, and she saw at eye level a pair of finest pale blue gloves gripping a package wrapped in paper. "Sorry, Mrs. Lockwood," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. The entire shop fell silent. Mrs. Lockwood tutted then, with a sweep of her skirts, and was gone. The door jangled shut behind her. The remaining customers stared at Pearl. She smiled awkwardly, brushing sawdust from her frock, and when they turned back to their shopping, she sighed in relief and took her place in the queue. Staring at the shelves stacked floor to ceiling, with tins and jars, Pearl soon forgot Mrs. Lockwood. In her head she'd rehearsed how she'd asked Mr. Noble very nicely for credit. More credit. When it came to her turn, though, it was a shopkeeper's daughter who served her. "Flour, please," said Pearl, "and sugar, and some butter. Some raisins and mixed peel, please." There were other ingredients needed too. She watched as the girl weighed things out, then wrapped them neatly in brown paper. The last time she'd made a pudding was with Agnes, who chased around the kitchen with baking powder all over her hands. A sad ache filled her chest. At last the parcels were ready. "How are you paying?" asked the girl. Pearl took a deep breath. "On the account, please." "Name?" "Granger." There was no flicker of concern. No refusal. The girl simply nodded. 7 perfectly wrapped parcels lay on the counter. Pearl scooped them up into her arms. She couldn't believe how easy it had been. Perhaps Pa was right and her luck was changing. She'd almost reached the door when Mr. Noble's voice boomed behind her. "Stop there, Miss Granger!" She paused. Her legs went weak. "Bring those goods back, please." Another hush fell over the shop. Pearl felt people's eyes on her yet again. Her face grew hot. The parcels, piled up to her chin, were threatening to slide out of her grip. Mr. Noble came out from behind the counter. "No more credit," he said, his apron chest all puffed out, "until your family's account is settled." A parcel of currants slid to the floor. Next went the flour, landing with a dusty thump. Jiggling her arms, Pearl tried to catch the sugar, but that went tumbling too. "You'll be charged for what you ruin," Mr. Noble warned, making no effort to help her. She knew she should dump what parcels she still had and leave. By now she was close to tears. It was Christmas. She only wanted a bit of good cheer for once. And tomorrow her family might be rich, perhaps as rich as the Lockwoods, and then they'd pay off their account tenfold. But just like those storeholders, Mr. Noble wouldn't believe her if she told him. So Pearl didn't go to the counter. She did a flit. Which leaves Pearl and me to wish you all the very, very best of Christmases. I hope you have a brilliant time. I hope you have a lovely day on the big day itself. I hope you have lovely food. I hope you have lovely presents. And I hope there's a few books in there as well, of course, because that's what's going to be on my Christmas list, if I'm honest, books. And merry, merry, merry festivities. And let's hope that 2021 is a wonderful year. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.